The Winchester rifle trembled in Jake Cartwright's weathered hands as he stared down at the woman who'd shared his bed for 8 nights straight. Elena Morales. She was kneeling in the snow just outside his cabin, the wind whipping her raven hair across her bare shoulders. Snowflakes melted on her skin, glistening like tiny diamonds in the gray light. But it wasn't the cold or her beauty that made Jake's blood run like ice. It was the thing she held in her delicate fingers. A photograph, a faded picture of the man Jake had shot and killed 3 years ago. "I came here to murder you, Jake Cartwright," she whispered, and her voice cracked like river ice in a thaw. "But now—" The wind stole the rest of her words, howling through the Medicine Bow Mountains, carrying the scent of pine, gun smoke, and a regret so deep it felt like a physical weight. Jake's finger, calloused from a lifetime of triggers, hovered over his own. This woman, this beautiful, dangerous creature, had played him like a fiddle. She'd found the lonely corners of his 58-year-old heart and filled them with a warmth he'd thought was long dead. She'd made him feel alive again when all he'd felt for years was the ghosts of too many dead men. But the tears tracking through the grime on her face weren't lies. He knew it in his bones, the way her body had molded to his in the dark, the way she cried out his name. That wasn't an act. And now 6 armed men were riding hard through the blizzard, their horses churning up the snow, coming to kill them both. The whole thing was a setup, a trap, and he'd walked right into it, led by a loneliness he hadn't even admitted he had. It had started like any other day in the Wyoming Territory, that December of 1885. Jake was splitting firewood, the rhythmic thud of the axe a comfort against the screaming wind. 30 years tracking outlaws, first for the Texas Rangers, then for the Pinkertons, had taught him to read the weather like you read a man's tells at a poker table. Both could turn on you. Both could kill you if you weren't paying attention. His cabin was his fortress, 50 miles from Laramie, tucked against a granite cliff face that took the brunt of the wind. He'd chosen this isolation on purpose. Out here, the only faces that could haunt him were the ones in his memory. Then he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Hoofbeats, faint at first, then closer, struggling through the storm. She appeared out of the swirling white like a ghost, a fever dream. A woman slumped over the neck of a paint horse, her dark hair a wild banner in the wind. The horse stumbled, its legs giving out, and she slid silently into a deep drift of snow. And she didn't move. Jake froze. Every instinct screamed at him. 30 years of hunting men had taught him that a beautiful woman in trouble was usually the deadliest bait of all. But her lips were blue. Her breathing was a shallow, ragged whisper. Bait or not, she'd be dead in an hour if he left her there. With a curse, he trudged through the snow and lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than a sack of feed. He carried her inside, the storm raging at his back, as if trying to reclaim her. Her clothes told a story he couldn't quite read. A fine wool dress, the kind a lady might wear, hidden beneath a rough man's coat. Her boots were soft leather, expensive. No working woman could afford boots like that. But then he saw her hands. Small scars crisscrossed her palms, and the calluses on her fingertips spoke of hard, repetitive labor. She was a walking contradiction, a puzzle wrapped in unconscious beauty. Jake built up the fire until it roared, then heated coffee, black as sin and strong enough to wake the dead. When he turned back from the stove, her eyes were open. Green eyes. Irish eyes in a Spanish face, he thought. And they were watching him with the weary caution of a cornered wolf. "Where am I?" Her voice was low and musical, with the soft accent of the New Mexico territory. "My cabin," Jake said, keeping his distance. He held out the coffee cup like a peace offering. "You nearly froze to death out there. I'm Jake." She took the cup, her fingers brushing his. "Elena." Even half dead from the cold, her touch sent a jolt through him, a spark of lightning he hadn't felt in decades. It was a dangerous feeling. "I was riding to Cheyenne," she said, her voice stronger now. "Looking for work." Jake eyed her fine dress. "What kind of work?" "Governess," she said, just a little too quickly. "My employer in Santa Fe." His ranch failed. Lies came easy to most folks, but Elena hesitated for half a second too long. just a flicker of uncertainty in those green eyes. Jake filed it away. That dress cost more than a cowboy made in 6 months. Her Spanish was too clean, too refined for a servant, but the blizzard didn't care about her lies. It howled and screamed for 3 straight days, trapping them together in the small log cabin. For 3 days, they were a world unto themselves. Elena wasn't helpless. She cooked, her movements efficient and graceful. She mended a tear in his shirt with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. She even helped with the few cattle he kept, mucking out the stalls without a word of complaint. She moved like a dancer, whether she was stirring a pot of beans or pitching hay, and she watched him. Whenever she thought he wasn't looking, Jake would catch her studying him. Not like a woman looks at a man she desires, but with a strange, calculating intensity that made the hair on his neck stand up. It was the look of a hunter sizing up her prey. On the third night, the firelight casting long, dancing shadows on the walls, she broke the silence. "You've killed men," she said. It wasn't a question. He was sitting on the bench by the hearth, cleaning his Winchester. The firelight played across the long, jagged scar that ran down his left cheek. "A few," he answered, not looking up. "How many?" He considered lying, but for some reason, he told her the truth. 23. Elena nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on his face. "Do you regret it?" "Every damn one." The admission surprised him. He rarely said that out loud, not even to himself. But there was something about her, something that pulled the truth from him. She moved closer on the wooden bench they shared, so close her shoulder brushed against his. The contact was electric. "What if they deserved it?" she asked, her voice soft. "Nobody deserves killing, girl. Sometimes it's just necessary." "Even if they hurt innocent people?" she pressed. "Stole everything from a family? Left children without a father?" Her voice was tight now, laced with a pain that was older and deeper than the winter cold outside. Jake finally looked at her, really looked at her. He studied her profile in the firelight, the proud set of her jaw, the fierceness in her eyes. "Sounds personal." Elena's jaw clenched. "Everything's personal out here." The storm showed no signs of letting up. The next day, a heavy beam in the barn roof splintered under the weight of the snow. They worked together to shore it up, the lantern casting a small golden circle of light in the dusty gloom. Working side by side in the cold, Jake found himself watching her, the sway of her hips as she carried a plank of wood, the delicate curve of her neck when she bent down. She was nearly 40 years his junior, beautiful as a desert sunrise, and he had no business thinking the things he was thinking. But when she looked up and her eyes met his across the lantern light, he saw it. The same dangerous, impossible desire that was making his own hands shake worse than they had in his first gunfight. "Jake," she whispered, and the way she said his name, soft and low, almost broke him. "You should get some sleep," he managed, his voice hoarse. "Storm might break tomorrow." But he didn't move. Elena took a step closer, her face illuminated by the flickering lantern. "What if I don't want it to?" The question hung in the cold air between them, thick as smoke. Jake knew he should turn away, walk back to the cabin, lock the door. But he couldn't. His feet felt rooted to the spot. Her hand came up and caught his wrist. Her touch was a brand, burning right through the thick flannel of his shirt. "I'm too old for games, Elena. I'm not playing games." She stepped into his space, so close he could feel the warmth of her breath on his face. Her breath misted in the cold air between them. He could see the tiny flecks of gold in her green eyes, could count the freckles scattered across the bridge of her nose. Her lips parted slightly, an invitation he knew he was too weak to refuse. "You don't know what you're asking," he rasped. "I know exactly what I'm asking." Her voice dropped to a whisper, a sound that wrapped around him and pulled him closer. "The question is, are you too much of a coward to take it?" Jake Cartwright had faced down Apache war parties, stared down the barrels of a dozen guns, and hunted killers across 3 territories. But Elena Morales, standing in a cold barn with a lantern and a challenge in her eyes, terrified him in a way bullets never could. The 8th night was the breaking point. The storm had finally exhausted itself, leaving a world of pristine, silent white. But inside the cabin, a different kind of storm was brewing. Elena sat beside him on the bench, so close her thigh pressed against his, sending fire through his veins. Her scent, something like lavender and winter air, filled his head, making it impossible to think straight. "Tell me about her," she said, her voice a low murmur. Her fingers, impossibly gentle, traced the scar on his cheek. "Who?" he asked, though he knew. "The woman who left this." Her touch was light as a feather, feathering along his jawline. "Not the knife. The woman who made you afraid to love again." Jake caught her hand, his own rough and calloused against her smooth skin. "Don't." "Why?" she challenged, her green eyes locking with his. "Because I'm too young? Too dangerous?" She leaned in closer, her voice dropping even lower. "Or is it because you want me too much?" The fire crackled and spat, the only sound in the cabin besides their breathing. Outside, the wind whispered through the pine branches. He should have pulled away. He should have stood up and walked to the other side of the room. But her fingers were twining with his, a perfect, impossible fit. Smooth skin against weathered calluses. Youth against a lifetime of regret. "There was someone," he finally admitted, the words tasting like rust in his mouth. "A long time ago. She died because I brought trouble to her door. My trouble." "I'm not her," Elena said softly. "No." Jake let his gaze wander over her face, the stubborn tilt of her chin, the way the firelight turned her skin to gold. "You're something else entirely." "What am I, Jake?" she whispered, her breath warming his neck. He couldn't answer. He couldn't think of anything but the way her wool dress clung to curves that made him feel 20 years old again, foolish and reckless and alive. She leaned in and pressed her lips to the pulse fluttering at the base of his throat. His resolve, worn thin over 8 long days and nights, crumbled into dust. "Elena," he groaned, her name a prayer and a curse. "Touch me," she whispered against his skin. "Please." His hands, as if with a will of their own, found her waist, his thumbs pressing into the soft flesh above her hips. She was all fire and silk beneath his rough palms. She was everything he'd forgotten he wanted, everything he'd told himself he could never have. She shifted, turning to face him, and then she was in his lap, straddling him, the flannel of her dress riding up her thighs. That was it. The last of his control snapped. Their first kiss was a collision, a desperate, hungry thing that tasted of coffee and 8 days of unspoken need. Elena's fingers tangled in his silver hair, pulling him deeper, demanding more. She moved against him with an urgency that stole his breath, an urgency that mirrored the fierce, aching need that had been building inside him. 30 years of loneliness, of a cold and empty bed, dissolved in that one moment. He stood, lifting her easily, and carried her the few steps to his bed. His hands were reverent as he peeled away the layers of her clothing, his gaze worshiping her in the flickering firelight. She was more beautiful than he could have imagined, all long lines and gentle curves. Her skin was feverish beneath his touch. Long legs wrapped around his waist, her back arching as he explored every inch of her with his lips and tongue. Her soft cries of pleasure echoed off the rough log walls, a symphony more perfect than any church hymn. They made love with the raw hunger of the damned seeking salvation, two lonely souls crashing together in the heart of a winter storm. Elena gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back, meeting his passion with a fierce energy of her own. And Jake, God help him, he took everything she offered. He marked her with his touch, with his mouth, until she was trembling and sobbing his name like a prayer. Afterwards, she lay curled against his chest, her head nestled in the crook of his shoulder. Her fingers traced the network of old scars on his torso. "I could stay here forever," she murmured into his skin. "You deserve better than a broken-down ex-lawman with more ghosts than memories," he said, his voice rough with emotion. She lifted her head, her green eyes fierce in the dim light. "You're not broken. You're the strongest man I've ever known." Jake wanted to believe her. For 8 perfect days, in the heart of that blizzard, he almost did. He almost allowed himself to hope. And then Elena made a mistake. The next morning, the world outside was bright and clean, the sun glittering on the fresh snow. Elena went out to tend to the horses, humming a soft tune. She left her saddlebags by the door. Jake wasn't the kind of man who went through a woman's belongings. He'd been raised better than that. But 23 dead men and a lifetime of suspicion had taught him that survival trumped manners every time. His gut was screaming at him that something was still wrong. He knelt by the bags and unbuckled the leather strap. Inside, beneath a spare shift in a small box of ammunition, his fingers brushed against a piece of stiff cardboard. He pulled it out. It was a daguerreotype, a photograph of a young Mexican man, handsome in a cocky sort of way, with a defiant smile and the exact same stubborn chin as the woman humming in his barn. Luis Morales. The name hit Jake like a physical blow. His blood turned to ice water in his veins. 3 years ago, outside Albuquerque, Luis Morales had been at the center of a cattle-rustling ring that was plaguing every ranch within a 50-mile radius. Jake had been hired by the Pinkertons to track him down. He'd cornered the boy in a dry arroyo. Luis had been fast with a gun, but Jake had been faster. Elena Morales was his sister, the beautiful woman sleeping in his bed. The woman who had cried out his name in passion hadn't stumbled upon his cabin by accident. She'd come for revenge. When she walked back inside, her cheeks flushed from the cold and a dusting of snow on her dark hair, Jake was waiting. He was standing by the fire, the photograph held loosely in his hand. She stopped dead in the doorway, her eyes fixing on the picture. All the color drained from her face. Then a look of quiet resignation settled over her features. "You know," she said. It wasn't a question. "I know." Jake's voice sounded hollow, dead, even to his own ears. "How long were you planning to wait? Until my guard was down? Until I was sleeping?" Elena stepped inside, closing the door softly against the cold. "I wasn't going to wait at all," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I came here to put a bullet in your heart the very first night." "What stopped you?" he asked, the words tearing at his throat. Tears welled in those incredible green eyes, glittering like emeralds in the morning light. "You did," she choked out. "The way you looked at me. Not like I was dangerous, but like I was. Precious. The way you held me in the night, like you were afraid I'd disappear." She took a hesitant step toward him, her hands outstretched in a pleading gesture. "Jake, what happened between us? It's real. It wasn't part of the plan. I fell in love with you." "Love?" Jake laughed, a bitter, ugly sound that had no place in the quiet cabin. "You don't even know me. I know you saved me from freezing to death when you could have left me in the snow," she countered, her voice growing stronger. "I know you're gentle with your animals, and that you read poetry by the fire when you think no one's watching. I know you make me feel safe in a way I'd forgotten was even possible." Her voice broke on a sob. "And I know that killing you now would destroy whatever is left of my soul." Before Jake could process her words, before he could decide if she was telling the truth or spinning the most convincing lie he'd ever heard, the sharp crack of a rifle shot echoed from the trees. It was followed by the thunder of hoofbeats, the shouts of men. Horses burst from the woods, 6 riders fanning out, their guns drawn, surrounding the cabin. A harsh voice cut through the winter air, a voice filled with gravel and hate. "Elena, send out the gringo who killed our Luis. Send him out, or we burn you both alive." Jake automatically reached for his Winchester, his body moving on pure instinct. "Looks like your family found us." Elena rushed to his side, her face a mask of terror. She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his flesh. "They're not my family anymore," she said, her eyes boring into his. "You are." The voice belonged to Miguel Sanchez. Jake recognized it instantly. Luis Morales' cousin, a man meaner than a cornered rattlesnake and twice as deadly. Jake had run across him once down in Texas, and the memory was not a pleasant one. Miguel was driven by a twisted sense of blood loyalty and a bottomless well of greed. "You got 30 seconds, Elena," Miguel shouted, his voice closer now. He was using a snowdrift for cover. "Then we start shooting, and we don't stop till the cabin is full of holes and you're both dead." Jake moved fast, his mind all business now. He checked his weapons. The Winchester, his Colt .45, and the sawed-off shotgun he kept loaded with buckshot under the bed. 6 men. The odds weren't good, but the cabin was solid, with narrow fields of fire. They had a fighting chance. They'll kill you if I surrender, Elena whispered. She was already moving, grabbing Jake's spare rifle from the wall mount and loading shells into it with practiced, steady hands. He was surprised by her confidence. They'll kill us both anyway, Jake said grimly, positioning himself by the front window, peering through a small crack in the logs. Miguel is not the forgiving type. How do you know Miguel? Elena asked, her voice tight with tension. Ran across him and your brother down in Texas a few years back. They were running a brand blotting operation, rustling cattle. Elena's jaw tightened into a hard line. Luis wasn't a rustler when he died, she said, her voice cold as steel. He was defending our family's land from the railroad men who were trying to steal it. You murdered an innocent man, Jake. The words hit him harder than any bullet. He'd been given a file by the Pinkertons, evidence, witness statements, all painting Luis Morales as a hardened criminal. But looking at the fierce conviction in Elena's eyes, a cold, sickening doubt began to creep into his heart. Had he been played? Had someone powerful wanted Luis Morales out of the way and used Jake's gun, his reputation, to do it? Elena, Miguel's voice called out again, closer this time. Your gringo lover is a hired killer. He shot Luis in the back like a coward for a pouch of railroad gold. That's a lie, Jake snarled, but the doubt was there in his own voice now. Is it? Elena's eyes searched his face, demanding the truth. Were you there, Jake? Did you see Luis draw on you first? Jake tried to cast his mind back 3 years to that dusty arroyo. It had happened so fast. A confrontation. Shouting. Luis had spun around suddenly, and Jake had fired. Instinct. Years of training. But had the boy been reaching for his gun? Or had he been trying to surrender? Or maybe reaching for something else entirely? He couldn't remember. The memory was a blur of dust and sunlight and the shocking roar of his own gun. A bullet splintered the wood frame of the window, showering Jake's face with tiny shards. The fight was on. Jake returned fire without hesitation, his Winchester barking once. One of Miguel's men screamed and pitched forward into the snow, a dark stain spreading on his chest. One down, Jake yelled. Elena was already at the back window, the spare rifle pressed firmly to her shoulder. She fired, the report echoing Jake's. 2 down, she called out, her voice steady and calm. 4 left to go. More shots peppered the cabin walls, bullets thudding into the thick logs like angry hornets. Jake heard a scrabbling sound on the roof, followed by the crunch of boots in the snow up there. They're on the roof, he yelled, trying for the chimney. He dove for the bed, grabbing the sawed-off shotgun. He pointed the wide barrel straight up the stone chimney and pulled both triggers. The roar inside the small cabin was deafening. A choked scream came from above, and a body crashed down into the fireplace, scattering burning logs and embers across the wooden floor. The cabin began to fill with smoke. Elena! Miguel's voice was different now, desperate, frightened. He's using you. Jake Cartwright kills for money. He doesn't care about you. He cared enough to give me a chance, Elena shouted back, her words punctuated by another rifle shot as she fired at a muzzle flash in the tree line. That's more than you ever did, Miguel. Jake scrambled to his feet, moving to help her put out the fire, but a sudden searing pain exploded in his left shoulder. He staggered back, a grunt of agony escaping his lips. Miguel's shot had found its mark. Blood, hot and sticky, soaked through his flannel shirt. His entire left arm went numb and useless. Jake! Elena's cry was sharp with fear. Keep shooting! He gasped, gritting his teeth against the pain. He switched the heavy Winchester to his right hand, the movement awkward and slow. 2 more of Miguel's men, emboldened by Jake's injury, made a rush for the front door. Elena spun and fired, her shot dropping the first man in his tracks. But the second one was too close. He slammed his shoulder into the door, the wood groaning in protest. Jake met him head-on, leveling the shotgun with one hand and firing. The blast lifted the man clean off his feet and sent him flying backward into the snow. In that brief, deadly silence, Miguel Sanchez appeared at the shattered front window. He was holding a Colt .45, the barrel aimed squarely at Jake's chest. Should have minded your own business, lawman, Miguel sneered. The gun roared. Jake felt the impact like a sledgehammer hitting his chest. The force of the bullet drove him backward. his legs tangling beneath him. He crashed against the far wall and slid to the floor. He tried to take a breath, but his lungs wouldn't work. Blood bubbled on his lips. Elena screamed. It wasn't a sound of fear. It was a sound of pure, primal rage, a sound that chilled the blood of every man who heard it. She spun, the rifle swinging toward Miguel in a deadly arc. The outlaw was fumbling to reload, a triumphant smirk on his face. He thought he'd won. He was wrong. Elena's shot caught Miguel dead center in the chest, spinning him around. As he fell, she worked the lever action of the rifle with a furious speed, firing again and again and again into his collapsing body. She kept pulling the trigger, the hammer clicking on empty chambers long after Miguel was still, her face a mask of tears and fury. "Elena," Jake managed to whisper, his voice a faint, wet rattle. She dropped the empty rifle and scrambled to his side, her hands fluttering over the grievous wound in his chest. Blood was everywhere, pooling on the rough wooden floorboards. His breathing was coming in short, painful, shuddering gasps. "Don't you dare die on me, Jake Cartwright," she sobbed, pressing her hands against the wound in a futile attempt to stop the bleeding. "Not after I just found you." Jake tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace of pain. "Guess we're even now." His vision was starting to tunnel, the edges growing dark. "Your brother," he rasped, forcing the words out. "I remember now. The sun was in my eyes. He wasn't reaching for his gun. He was reaching for his hat. The wind had blown it off." The terrible truth, buried for 3 years, finally came clear in his dying moments. "I killed an innocent man, Elena. I'm so damn sorry." Elena bent down, her tears falling onto his face. She pressed her lips to his forehead. "I forgive you," she whispered, her voice thick with sorrow. "Luis would forgive you too. He never wanted any of this." For 6 weeks, Jake Cartwright teetered on the edge of death's door. And for 6 weeks, Elena Morales refused to let him cross it. She dug the bullets out of his chest and shoulder with the point of a sterilized knife. She stitched his wounds with a needle and thread. She cleaned them daily, fighting off the infection that threatened to claim him. When he was too weak to move, she fed him broth, spoonful by spoonful. When the fever dreams came, making him cry out the names of the 23 men on his conscience, she held him, whispering soothing words until the shaking stopped. Slowly, painstakingly, his body began to heal. But as his physical strength returned, the reality of their situation settled back in, heavier than before. He would lie awake at night, watching her sleep in the chair by his bed, and his heart would ache with a love so fierce it felt like another wound. He was too old for her, too broken. His past was a battlefield littered with corpses. She was young, vibrant, full of life. She deserved a future, not a man haunted by his past. She deserved children, a real home, a husband who didn't wake up screaming from nightmares of the men he'd killed. The morning he could finally stand on his own 2 feet without the world spinning, he made the hardest decision of his life. "You have to go," he told her, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Elena Morales rode out of Jake Cartwright's life on a morning when the snow fell in soft, silent flakes that looked like tears. She had begged him to let her stay. She'd cried, she'd pleaded, she'd promised she didn't care about their age difference, about his reputation, about the ghosts that walked with him. But Jake had been as immovable as the granite cliffs behind his cabin, even as each of her tears felt like a hot poker against his heart. "You're 24 years old, Elena," he'd said, his voice rough. "I'm nearly 60. What kind of life is that for you?" "It's the only life I want," she had cried. "Today, maybe," he'd answered, turning away so she couldn't see the agony in his eyes. "But what about 10 years from now? What about when you realize you could have had children, a real family, a man who isn't a walking graveyard?" She had fought him with every argument that love could create, but his mind was a locked door. He had destroyed too many good things in his life. He would not destroy her, too. He stood in the cabin doorway and watched her ride away, a solitary figure growing smaller and smaller against the vast, white landscape. Just before she disappeared over the rise, she turned back one last time and raised her hand in a final, heartbreaking farewell. Jake raised his own in return. Then he went back inside the empty cabin, closed the door, and didn't come out again for 3 days. 10 years passed, an entire decade. Jake sold a small cabin and the few head of cattle and bought a proper ranch a few miles outside the growing town of Medicine Bow. He built a house with his own 2 hands, a house with more than one room, a house with glass in the windows. The nightmares still came, but they were less frequent now, their edges softened by the passing of time. He learned to sleep through the night without a gun under his pillow. The local folk came to respect him. They knew the stories, of course, but they also knew the man. Jake Cartwright, the former lawman who'd settled down. The quiet man who was always willing to help a neighbor with sick cattle or a broken fence. He never married. He never took another woman to his bed. Some loves, he'd learned, burn so hot and bright they blind you to all others for the rest of your days. He was mending a fence post on a bright spring morning when the sound of hoofbeats made him look up. It was a sound he heard every day, but something about this rhythm was different, familiar. A woman was dismounting from a beautiful Palomino mare at his gate. She moved with a familiar, unconscious grace that made his heart stop dead in his chest. She was 34 now. The years had been kind to her. She was still beautiful, breathtakingly so, but her beauty was different now. It was tempered by time, by wisdom earned through living. Her green eyes, when they met his, held a depth that hadn't been there a decade ago. She walked toward him, stopping a few feet away. "Do you still remember me, Jake Cartwright?" If this story of love, loss, and redemption on the unforgiving frontier touched your heart, hit that like button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And don't forget to subscribe for more tales that'll grip your soul. Until next time, keep riding toward the sunset.